When the San Francisco Giants took home the NL West title in 2021, many fans were quick to praise manager Gabe Kapler for steering the team to a Major League Baseball leading 107 wins, using a combination of data-driven decision-making, decades of on-field experience, and a distinctly collaborative clubhouse culture. Fans were also quick to notice that Gabe Kapler is freaking ripped. One could even be forgiven for thinking the 46-year-old was a member of the Giants roster himself, especially given his 12-year playing career in the big leagues. Unfortunately for fans of weird baseball, like myself, the chances of Kapler once again taking the field are slim to none, in large part due to his managing duties for the winningest team in baseball. But what if he could? After all, it wasn't too long ago that player managers were a common occurrence in Major League Baseball, regularly suiting up to play while simultaneously managing lineups and pitching decisions. Who's to say it couldn't happen again? In fact, let's say the role of the player manager did make a comeback in today's game. Who would be the ideal candidate to take on that position and all the responsibilities it entails? To answer this question, we'll first have to take a look at how player managers came to be in Major League Baseball, and hopefully find out why they disappeared in the first place. It's no secret that baseball in the 1800s was played a bit differently from today's game. One constant through the years, however, has been the owners. Or, more specifically, the owner's desire to make as much money as possible by any means possible. So it didn't take long for owners like Ben Douglas Jr. of the National Association's Middletown Mansfields to realize that they could save a few bucks by handing over managing duties to players like 20-year-old catcher John Clapp, getting both a manager and a player for the price of one. And thus, the player manager was born. In the early days of baseball, it wasn't uncommon to see a player manager pinch hit themselves for a batter, or to take themselves out of a game. One story even goes so far as to credit a certain player manager with performing the first, and to this day only, mid-play position change. The tale goes like this. In an 1877 game against the Indianapolis Hoosiers, an opposing batter fouled a high pop fly towards the Boston Beaneaters dugout, where player manager and future Hall of Famer Mike King Kelly was standing at the top step. Knowing none of his fielders would be able to make the play in time, Kelly quickly stepped out onto the field, yelled out, "Kelly now catching for Boston," and proceeded to snag the pop-up for the out. Naturally, Major League Baseball patched up that loophole immediately, revising the rulebook to clarify that all position changes must happen when the ball is not actively in play. But for one brief moment in 1877, baseball fans were treated to a glimpse of the weirdness made possible by the existence of player managers. Starting with John Clapp's debut in 1872, at least one person served as player manager for a Major League Baseball team every season through 1955. It became such a common practice that many teams began naming their most popular players as managers in an effort to boost attendance at games. From Cy Young to Ty Cobb to Honus Wagner, some of the most legendary names in the history of the sport have donned the hyphenated honorific. In fact, out of the roughly 200 people who have held the title of player manager over the years, 59 of them are in the Hall of Fame. Toward the end of his playing career, Babe Ruth openly campaigned for the position of New York Yankees manager, but owner Jacob Ruppert repeatedly refused the slugger's requests. Eventually, New York did what many considered unthinkable, trading Ruth to the Boston Braves in 1935, where he would serve as the middling ball club's assistant manager. After a few months, however, the Babe came to realize that Braves owner Emil Fuchs had no intention of ever making him the manager, and had only brought in the Bambino as a publicity stunt. The Babe retired from playing later that season. Of the 5 members to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame's inaugural class, Ruth was the only one never to be offered the position of MLB manager. Despite Babe Ruth's unsuccessful attempts to fulfill the role, the player manager was still in its heyday at the time of his retirement. The Great Depression had rendered funds scarcer than ever for Major League clubs, forcing them to cut costs in any way possible, which, of course, included having players pull double duty as manager when necessary. In 1934 alone, 5 of the 8 managers in the National League were also active MLB players. By the end of World War II, however, it was clear that the days of players routinely taking on managerial responsibilities were coming to a close, as the number of practitioners across the league dwindled. The golden age of the player manager was reaching its end. In total, Major League Baseball has seen 221 men take on the role of player manager at one point or another. Of those 221, 215 of them played/managed before 1960. That's over 97% of player managers whose tenures concluded before the aluminum can was invented. It also means that in the last 6 decades, only 6 people have called themselves the player manager of an MLB team: Hank Bauer, L. Tappy, Frank Robinson, Joe Torre, Don Kessinger, and Pete Rose. It's that final member of this list whose exploits as skipper of the Cincinnati Reds made him the most infamous player manager in history, while also potentially bringing an end to the position for the rest of time. By this point, I'm sure most of you watching are familiar with the saga of Pete Rose, but for all those out there who have either been living under a rock or stuck in a coma for the last 4 decades, I'll give you the lowlights. It's a tale as old as time, really. Player spends years as one of the greatest batters in history. Player is then offered a job as manager of a major league ball club, at which point he begins racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars in gambling debts to bookies across multiple states, resulting in a lifetime of shame and a permanent ban from baseball for betting on games. Nothing you haven't heard before. But nestled among the drama and intrigue that has been Charlie Hustle's life was a 3-year stint as player manager of the Cincinnati Reds. Now, there's no denying that Rose knew his way around a baseball field. His 24-year career ranks as the 11th longest in MLB history. But the decision to keep him on as a player while having him manage the team was not without its own fair share of controversy. By 1984, the year Rose first became the Reds' manager, it was clear that the once prolific hitter could no longer be counted on to provide the Hall of Fame numbers he once had, with a .259 average over 95 games in Montreal sparking rumors of his imminent retirement. So when it was announced that Rose would be taking on the role of manager following a mid-season trade to the Reds, many were surprised to hear that he would remain on the field as well, in an attempt to break fellow alleged dirtbag Ty Cobb's all-time hits record. It was a decision that raised many an eyebrow, which, when combined with the gambling scandal, certainly did nothing to help Rose's public image. But as for the assertion that Pete Rose was responsible for single-handedly killing the role of player manager, well, the evidence remains unconvincing. For one thing, Rose's fall from grace didn't stop several teams from considering veteran players for managerial spots in the years following, as was the case in 1997 when the Blue Jays considered bringing back designated hitter Paul Molitor to fill the dual role. What seems more likely, at least to me, is that over time, being a player manager just got to be too darn hard. As analytics have advanced and the responsibilities of the manager have increased, it started to make less and less sense to expect active MLB players to shoulder what essentially amounts to an entire second full-time job. But that's not to say that it couldn't happen again, and soon. The conclusion of the 2021 season marked the 35th straight year without a player manager in Major League Baseball, a streak that will in all likelihood continue into next year as well. But don't be so quick to write off the possibility of a resurgence just yet. While it is certainly unlikely, at least at the present moment, that the player manager will undergo a renaissance in the near future, it is far from impossible. Think about it for a second. As roster construction and behind-the-scenes decision-making have increasingly become the responsibility of front offices and baseball operations departments, the role of the MLB manager has been redefined over the last few years. While they're still expected to assume the traditional duties of the position, setting lineups, making pitching changes, and other in-game decisions, now more than ever, it seems like MLB teams are hiring managers based on their clubhouse presence and ability to connect with players. And if a manager can't keep the team happy, there's a good chance they won't be there for long. With exceptions, of course. So then, why not just cut out the middleman altogether and start letting players manage again? Being players themselves, they would have no problem keeping in touch with the clubhouse after all. In fact, the biggest obstacle I see to the return of the player manager comes down to the, let's say, less than ideal state of relations between ownership and the Players Association at the present moment. But disregarding the complexities of labor negotiations for a minute, let's try a quick thought experiment. Pretend you've been given the power to make any current MLB player the manager of their team. Who do you pick and why? Well, the obvious play would be to choose a veteran player, one who's been a part of their team long enough to have built up a solid rapport with both the clubhouse and the front office. Think someone along the lines of a Miguel Cabrera or a Joey Votto. The second thing to look for is a player who is capable of handling the strategic aspects of Major League Baseball, both before and during the game. For this reason, it would be ideal to look at players whose positions typically require a talent for spur-of-the-moment, in-game decision-making, like catchers, shortstops, or center fielders. Players like Salvador Perez or Yadier Molina come to mind. Unfortunately, none of the players I've listed so far would probably make good player managers, for one reason: they're still too good at baseball. If a player is going to have enough time to tackle the role of manager, there's no way they can do that while still playing full-time. So everyday starters are, unfortunately, ineligible. So now that we've got our requirements figured out, we can start looking for players with the following: years of MLB experience, a strong connection with both their team and their fan base, the ability to make strategically sound decisions before and during games, and who aren't so good anymore as to require their presence on the field every day. Seems easy enough. Well, as you probably could have guessed, finding the ideal player manager, if one even exists, is not a simple task. Though there are still some pretty good options. But in the interest of time, I've narrowed it down to just one. Of all the players currently still active in Major League Baseball, I believe that the one most qualified to take on the fabled position of player manager is none other than Ryan Zimmerman. At 37 years old, Zimmerman has had more than his fair share of experience in the show, all of it with the Washington Nationals. He's manned the infield for the Nats under 8 different managers, seen the team through its worst seasons, and was there when they brought home the first World Series title in franchise history. He's also nearing the end of his now 17-year-old MLB career, having hinted at retirement multiple times over the past few seasons. But if he does continue playing, it would most likely be as a part-time option at best, giving him plenty of time to manage, so to speak. As far as his connection to the fan base is concerned, there are few currently playing who are more beloved than Zimmerman is by Nationals fans. Need proof? Take a look at the standing ovation he was given after being taken out during the last game of the 2021 season. There's also little doubt when it comes to his understanding of the game. Just ask Nationals bench coach Tim Bogar, who has said that if he were a young player, he would be picking Zimmerman's brain every day, because that man is a smart individual. And I mean, let's face it, who better to take the helm in DC than Mr. National himself? But now I want to hear what you think. If you had to pick one active player from your favorite team to become the manager, who would you choose? Sound off in the comments, and I'll see you next time with more